Hello, everyone. How are you doing at AAFAX today? It's another awesome day at the library. We are so happy to have Barbara Stark-Nemon here today. She is an award-winning author, and before I forget, her books are for sale right out in the atrium, and we're so happy to have her and her books here. Barbara incorporates embroidery and knitting and her background in art history in her stories, and today she's here to tell us all about that. Please help me give her a warm welcome to the stage.
Okay, so thank you so much, Christopher and Lucy, for asking me back wherever you are, Lucy, and to the library where I always love to come. And thank you all for being here instead of wandering around the fabulous event downstairs, which I hope if you haven't had a chance to go, you will do that. So I am kind of humbled to be here talking to artists and scholars who are much more experienced than I am and knowledgeable about fiber arts and its history. So let me start by explaining why it is that an English teacher turned speech and language therapist turned author of novels with a healthy dose of fiber arts hobbies ends up talking to you today. It's all about stories. And I just want to add, if I start to wander away from the microphone, will someone just go like this? Christopher will do that because I know people are streaming, and hello to all of you who are streaming, and they can't hear if I wander. So if I do, just give me a little signal. But anyway, it's all about stories. Stories are the through line that connect my personal and professional pathway and that are so important in the way I've used fiber arts. I got my storytelling chops from my attorney grandfather, and he was a refugee from Nazi Germany, and he offered us a better dessert if we could tell him a good story. He nurtured that sense in his grandchildren that we were worthwhile ourselves, that we had worthwhile stories to tell, and that it was worthwhile getting to be good at it. That encouragement led me to degrees in English literature and art history right here at the University of Michigan, and then a career as an English teacher, and then a speech and language therapist, working with children who had stories to tell, but not always the ability to communicate them adequately. My first novel, Even in Darkness, is based on the life of that storytelling grandfather and specifically of his sister throughout the 20th century in Europe. There are no fiber arts in that book, but I did make good use of my art history studies as paintings had a very important part in that novel. So my grandfather got me telling stories, but it was my grandmothers who introduced me to knitting and who I watched cross-stitch beautiful tablecloths and other items. And it was my mother, who's listening right now, hi Mom, who taught me to sew. I experienced that timeless transmission of creative skills, women's skills, in my own family, and it helped me form bonds with, as a young person, with family members that I might not have been able to do in other ways. It wasn't until I read and was deeply moved by Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities as a young teenager that I ever thought of the relationship of these two things that I loved to do. One was read novels, and the other was to knit and sew. And for those of you who don't remember, Madame Lafarge, in A Tale of Two Cities, knitted the names of her enemies as they were being guillotined by the French revolutionaries. and she used stitches coded to letters of the alphabet. It was my introduction to the long history of women using fiber arts to communicate, sometimes secretly, sometimes openly, but they would communicate about their politics, their enemies, their loves, their identities, and their dreams. My second novel, Hard Cider, features an avid knitter as the protagonist. Much of that character development and advancement of the mystery that forms the center of the plot takes place in knit shops. When I was writing Hard Cider, which is the story of Abby Rose, a woman of a certain age who dreams of starting a hard apple cider business on the Leelanau Peninsula right here in Michigan, I used the vehicle of knitting to connect her to another character who introduces a mystery that will disrupt Abby's life and everything she thought she understood about who her family really is. Abby Rose became a knitter for two reasons. First of all, I'm a knitter. And as you may know, writers are constantly told to write what you know. The second reason is that the town of Northport, which is the setting for this novel, has a wonderful knit shop and was the perfect setting for many scenes in the book and the launch of the mystery that's at the heart of the plot. And then just this past September, I launched my third novel, Isabella's Way, right here at the Ann Arbor District Library. And it's my second story that prominently features a woman whose fiber art plays a really important part in the book. Isabella's Way is the story of a 14-year-old with a talent for embroidery who has to leave her home in early 17th century Portugal and find her way to her father, who has gone ahead to Hamburg, Germany, to establish his textile business and to escape the Spanish Inquisition. Isabella believes she's a good Catholic and that she has nothing to fear from the Inquisition until a mysterious woman arrives with a message from Isabella's traveling father telling her that she must leave. She doesn't understand that she will be embroidering her way along a clandestine network of sanctuaries created to conduct new Christians or converted Jews to safety. She is relentlessly pursued by an official bent on persecuting all suspected heretics on behalf of the inquisitors. As she travels, Isabella learns of the danger and the importance of the work, embroidering items of clothing, banners, and small messages, using codes and symbols to signify danger or safety for each of the safe houses that she travels to. So this is a coming-of-age tale. It's a tale of resilience, of resistance, of love, of adventure, of danger, and of unexpected allies. I wish I could say that I intended to use the writing of Isabella's Way to feature the importance of fiber arts in the world, especially for women and in fiction, but that is not how Isabella came to me at all. I didn't really choose her, she chose me. But once she did, I realized two things: that all of my writing has been about how the unexpected and sometimes unwelcome circumstances that happen to us and that we can't control, but I'm very interested in how we respond, how we summon resilience, how we lean on allies, and how we face our world in response. And I am telling you that I am taking some pages of my own book in our current life right now. In 2011, I did a bike trip from Lisbon, Portugal to the Alhambra in Granada, Spain. And one of the first places we visited after a very steep climb up a big hill very early in the morning was this Celtic standing stone circle near Alter de Chão in Portugal, where we watched the sun appear above the Celtic gates to this standing stone circle. The folklore there is that if you see the sun come up with the distant mountain, coming up over that mountain and coming through that gate, that your ancestors can appear to you. Well, I knew that my great-grandmother's family had come from Portugal in the early 17th century and had gone to Hamburg, Germany. So perhaps that is why on the wonderful glide down that big hill, this 14-year-old girl and her story flew into my head and stayed there. However, I had 2 other books to write at that time, and I told her to wait, which she did. When it came to writing Isabella's Way, I knew that she was an embroiderer. That just sort of had flown into my head that very first time. But where did embroidery come from? Why embroidery? I was a knitter, a sewer, a quilter, but I had never done any embroidery. I have absolutely no answer to that question. I don't know why she appeared to me as an embroiderer, but I am so grateful that she did, because it led me to do a really deep dive into the history of embroidery, and the most important resource for me was this book called Threads of Life, The History of the World Through the Eye of a Needle. In it, the author, Claire Hunter, who is a world-renowned embroidery expert and historian, educated me not only in the technical history of embroidery in Europe, which made my use of, in the novel, way more authentic, but more importantly, on the functions that embroidery has fulfilled for women over time. Hunter has made an especially thorough study of the embroidery of Mary, Queen of Scots, and she lists these uses of Mary, Queen of Scots' very expert embroidery. Mary's most precious proof of royalty were the embroidered royal ciphers, monograms, and coats of arms and emblems that she created. It fixed her power and her sense of her divine right onto cloth. In captivity as she was, and just to remind you of the history, Queen Elizabeth had her imprisoned so that she could not usurp the throne. She actually dethroned her and imprisoned her. And while she was imprisoned, she embroidered crowned dolphins trying to leap over waves. She embroidered tortoises attempting to climb a tall crowned palm tree, a scurrying mouse trying to get away from a ginger cat. If you remember your history, Queen Elizabeth was quite the redhead. Marigolds trying to catch the sun, a lion caught in a net, a ship with a broken mast, a caged bird, more than 30 different devices which she used in order to notify the world that she was imprisoned and that she wanted to have her sovereign power back, and she wanted to be reinstated. But perhaps she also did this embroidery to maintain some sense of herself, to create some order out of the chaos that she was living in, and to exercise some choice in the tumult and humiliation of her life. At this time, and remember we're talking about the early 1600s, textiles were the most versatile form of visual messaging when most people were illiterate. Textiles were displayable, they were wearable, they were portable, they were recyclable. They could carry information from place to place and person to person. Color choices were really important. They declared allegiances and intimate relationships. People used classical and biblical illusions that could communicate stories that people would have been familiar with. Certain motifs were understood and very potent. Textile messages were also included in the artwork, in regular paintings and portraits, and they also communicated messages. Many people believed that the plants from which dyes and threads were extracted and spun provided a natural protection, an armory against threats of evil spirits. Needlework provided greater defense and protection against these spirits, and clothing was constructed to withstand these kinds of dangers. Hems, cuffs, necklines of traditional garments densely patterned in an array of colors were like safeguards. Reproductive zones were protected with intricate embroidery and embellishments to guard against trespass. I'm not sure how that worked out for them. But braids of stitchery protected seams, which could have been points of entry. Even changes of stitches and patterns and strips of cloth created diversions against these bad spirits. Canopies, sewn canopies, separated earth from heaven. Women's headdresses, men's caps, thresholds to homes, which were a very significant part of homes, were decorated with tapestries, hangings, tassels, and all kinds of embroidered motifs, trying to move energy and discourage evil trespass and bestow blessings upon the inhabitants who entered with the promise of safekeeping. People believed that color was a conductor of protection. Red was the most efficacious. It was the transmitter of positive energy. It represented passion and strength of the blood of life, power to guard against harm and promote fertility. It was the dominant color for celebration and for war campaigns. Blue represented the power of water, the essential element for survival, and also the color of the sky, which symbolized the heavens and spirituality. Green signified youth and life. Black was the earth ever present and everlasting, and it was also obviously the symbol for death and mourning. These talismanic symbols had many meanings that are lost to us today, but some of them are still pretty clear. A heart represented love, a tree, the tree of life. A butterfly signified liberation. A triangle was a protective symbol from antiquity, but also represented the shape of women's fertility. It could be the peaks of a mountain or the teeth of a dragon. Sequins, small mirrors, beads, tassels, bells, all kinds of these kinds of things fluttered and clinked to keep the evil spirits away and also to reflect them. Some cultures introduced mistakes purposely into their textiles as a sign of humility to not awaken the jealousy of the gods. How the stitching was done was even important. Stitching toward the body signified strength. Pushing a needle away from a heart would recruit its strength to whatever was being sewn next. Cross-stitching, right to left, was done for a man, left to right for a woman in a marriage quilt. Their union was the anchor. Ukrainians embroidered from the bottom to the top, the path of life, using the same needle at the beginning of the item as at the end for an unbroken flow of energy. So babies and children were the main need for protection. So that's why you saw a lot of pom-poms, which were charms against evil, with their round and fluffy softness. Flowers and animals were used to deflect evil on baby hats. So after reading Threads of Life, I started thinking back about how my use of knitting characters in hard cider fulfilled a number of functions that Claire Hunter describes in her review of textile history. Knitting as a calming activity, knitting as a connector to others, knitting as a metaphor for problem solving and creating something whole out of strings of situations and knots. Knitting as a means of personalized gifting, knitting as community building. I also thought about how I could use embroidery in Isabella's way in a more political, symbolic way in that story, and as a way for different characters to relate to each other. I chose symbols, I chose authentic to the time textiles, colors of thread, and wove those into the character and into the story. I came to this very expo last year and was introduced to the wonderful local chapter of Embroiderers Guilds of America. And one of its members, Sean Owen Cruz, was very generous with her time and talent, and there are several members right here in this audience. And she got me started on a project that was way over my head, but with her support and the support of other guild members, including her mom, who's also here today, I was able to embroider my book cover. So, like I said, this was kind of a fool's errand for me because I'd never done any embroidery before, but it was a wonderful way for me to get to know what it is that my character needed to know, literally having it in my hand, literally having to do that problem solving, and so forth. So you can actually see the rookie project back there if you want after I'm done. I also started to think back to other novels that I have read, and I wanted to rethink how the use of fiber arts aligned with what I had learned in Claire Hunter's work, and also what I'd learned in other things that I read. I did a huge amount of research at museums in Europe and really saw some original fiber arts from the early 17th century. And I went to my novel and my fiber arts groups on social media to ask what books stood out as examples of the importance of fiber arts in fictional work. And boy, did I get answers. I will just reflect on a couple of them here today, but I did create a more extensive list, which you can find under the extras section in my website if anybody's interested. And I actually have a copy of it back there. So there are some great examples, and I'm only going to talk about a couple of them this afternoon. First, obviously, is A Tale of Two Cities. Oh, there we go. Which I've already talked about, by Charles Dickens. Madame Defarge knits coded stitches with the names of those who were beheaded by French revolutionaries. This is an example of political and personal grievances, for sure. The Color Purple, which people don't really think about as a fiber arts related book, but if you will remember, Alice Walker really did use sewing and quilting as acts of symbols of female bonding, of creative expression, and a bid for independence. Also, purple is an LGBTQ symbol, and I've got to think that that was intentional. The Red Tent, those of you might remember way back when that book came out by Anita Diamond. The Red Tent is, in that book, the refuge for women during life cycle events, and it's also the place where they transmitted the sacred activities of spinning and weaving and sewing to each other, confirming that communal sense and that sisterhood among women. The Friday Night Knitting Club by Kate Jacob. Knitting is a metaphor for life in that book. Mistakes can be fixed. Comfort can be found in creativity and community, along with a nurturing kind of escape and possibility of transformation. And finally, a book that I only recently read, The Lady and the Unicorn by Tracy Chevalier, is about the demanding process of designing and weaving the Lady and the Unicorn tapestries. And that forms obviously a central part of the plot of this historical novel. And it also includes themes of power, of status, of personal expression, and emotional escape. So I can talk a little bit more about the research that I did, but I wanted to pause and see if anybody has questions at this point. No? Nobody has a question.
Here,
Irene.
let me get the mic for you, okay?
Oh, okay.
Oh, thank you. Well, okay. The only part I was, I don't know if it was confused or not quite convinced about, was how in their travels, they found these places of refuge and underground, like an underground, because it seemed like they're going, we know there's no highways like there are today, and they're just going along a path, practically in a field on the edge of a hillside, and they go up a driveway, and all of a sudden they're at these houses. And how do they really know where to go to find them and then be found after they'd been there, because someone had to come and bring them a message and say, it's safe to move on to the next one?
Right. Okay, great question. I did an extraordinary amount of research trying to establish, was there really an underground railroad type network, as I have, posited in this book, and struggle and read and research as I could. I could not find evidence in the early 1600s. However, there is a newly famous, although buried into history until 1980 something, of a woman, Dona Gracia Mendez Nasi, who was, in fact, responsible for creating just such a network. So just to recap the history, 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue, but also Isabella and Ferdinand kick all the Jews and all the Muslims out of Spain. Okay, so that's in 1492. Because Portugal was so busy running around the world discovering spice routes and becoming a nation of navigators and business people, they were not so interested in imposing the Spanish Inquisition at that time. So floods of Jews and Muslims came across the border from Spain into Portugal and settled there. The deal was, when the Inquisition was imposed, is you convert, you leave, or you die. Those were the only choices. And so many people did convert to Catholicism. Many people said they converted, but really were practicing their Judaism in secret at their peril. And many people left. So many of those people who left just came across the border into Portugal, settled in small towns, and thrived for about the next 80 years. Then a Spanish prince wanted to marry a Portuguese prince wanted to marry a Spanish princess, and the condition of that marriage was that the Inquisition would seriously, like, no messing around. Now we're really imposing the Inquisition. It had been there in the previous 80 years, but it had not been so seriously imposed. Now it was. So that started another whole route of people leaving. And it is the case that this woman, who had married a very wealthy trader, he had ships, he did spices, just had lots of business interests, and he died, and she got out of Dodge. She just said she saw the writing on the wall and managed to escape with a sizable part of her fortune and her daughter, and she first went to Brussels in Belgium, thrived there for a little while. Things got dicey there. Then she went to Venice, and now I'm talking about the only safe, and she was Catholic nominally. Over the course of her long life, she ended up returning to the Jewish faith and finding places where she could conduct this massive, was in her family, but also be Jewish. She created just such a network that I described. I did not know that when I wrote this book. I sort of found it in the middle of writing, but it was a little reinforcement that yes, this really was possible, even if it happened 80 years before the time of my book. And again, there is evidence, not just for this kind of clandestine network, but all kinds of political and religious information was transmitted through textiles. And so I found a lot of reinforcement for that. How people were able to communicate, I think that they just traveled and sent messages with trusted people and they use textiles. So I mean, that's the best explanation I can give. Yes, ma'am.
Here, Joyce. Great.
Hello. You said that you had specific designs that she used to convey whether a place was safe or whether it was dangerous. So were the meanings of those symbols conveyed between the people by word of mouth?
Good question. So early in the book, so Isabella has, I mean, she's 14, and people say, what 14-year-old can take this on? And I just want to remind everyone that in 1610, a 14-year-old was considered to be a young adult, not a child. Even so. But she, early on, a woman appears who comes from Spain bringing a message from Isabella's father. And how does she know to trust this woman? The woman is in possession of a pin that was given to Isabella's father by Isabella's mother, who died in the plague, et cetera, et cetera. So she knows to trust this woman, or believes that she can. And that woman is part of this network. And she and a person that she works with, she is in possession of like a little cheat sheet. These are the symbols, this is what they mean, which is sent to Isabella, and she has to throw it into the fire, because if it's ever found, obviously that would be a demonstration of her being part of this network. So the conceit is that she is leaving Portugal to go and embroider a dowry for a French nobleman that lives in the Pyrenees, and that's why because she's so expert, she is asked to go do that. So that's the excuse for her leaving. But the secret code is given to her, and she has to destroy it. Yep. They are. Yep.
Was there another question over here? Okay, here I come.
What's your next topic? This sounds fascinating. Now I want to know what you're going to do next.
I've been asked that quite a bit. Right now, I'm taking a little breather. There are a couple of smaller, I am fascinated by stories based on letters, and I have troves of family. My first book is largely based on a trove of letters and documents that I received from my great aunt. I have another trove that I'm working with, and then a recently departed wonderful woman who is a fabulous cook left me her cookbook, and I sat and interviewed her about every single recipe in her own personal cookbook, and I want to write that up for her family. So those are shorter projects, but stay tuned. My husband promises that I've got another book in me. I think back there.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. A lot of the work that you talked about is historical or modern. I was wondering if in the process of like your reading and your research, you ever came across examples of like fiber arts in science fiction or speculative fiction, kind of moving forward in time.
Wow. I am, full disclosure, not a reader of science fiction and speculative fiction. And interestingly, I did not get recommendations from people, but I bet there's some great examples of that. I just can't tell you what they are.
Hi, I was just wondering if we have a chance to go to Europe and visit some of those textiles that you saw during your research, where would you recommend that we go?
Wow. Madrid. If you're interested in Iberian Peninsula, totally blocking the name, the big museum, Prado, thank you. The Prado in Madrid, I mean, you could spend days in there, not just looking at the textiles, but looking at the examples of textiles which are so meticulously wrought in the clothing, in the tablecloths, in the wall hangings, and so forth. Years ago, I didn't research this particular book, but any of the museums in Paris. I mean, if you're talking about the big time here, and in Amsterdam, I really focused on the Iberian Peninsula, and I went not so much in Lisbon, to be honest. There wasn't as much of a trove there as I expected, but in France, I mean, I just spent so much time looking at paintings, and in Lyon, which like the height of the plot occurs in Lyon in France, and when I went there to just walk the streets and go into the triboules, which are these secret passageways that were built for the silk trade to protect silks as they were being taken from the workshops down to the river. They're now sort of restored, but they're fascinating. Of course, I used that in my book, but the person who was touring us on the medieval sections of Lyon, of the town, said, "I have a place to take you." And she took me to an amazing, it was a store, the back of which were these 17th and 18th century looms still doing the Jacobean weaving, and with all, I mean, it was stunning to see those looms that, a little later than my book, but not a lot later. And so just happenstance like that, and I said I'm really interested in the fiber arts history, so Lyon would be a fabulous place, because that, of course, was the center of the silk trade in Europe for more than 100 years.
Do we have any other questions? Okay.
Perhaps it's implied, but one of the things that heroes of your book and many people in centuries past had is good memory. Like Isabel has to commit to memories, a list of symbols, and also a way to embroider them, and all the training had to be committed to memory. At that time, people did not learn from books or videos. How did that knowledge come in? How was it acquired? Were there any special techniques actually to commit things to memory, not just a list of words, but specific fiber arts techniques? How was this lineage really passed?
So that's a great question. The short answer is samplers, so that, they didn't have textbooks, but embroiderers, most young embroiderers would start with samplers, and that would include whatever it is that, in this particular case, Isabella's parents own a textile business. Her father buys and sells textiles. Her mother was a master embroiderer. And so she learned from her mother, who was extremely talented. And so the assumption is that from a very young age, she was watching her mother, she was embroidering herself. So we hear at the beginning of the book that she is working on a very sophisticated piece for the local priest in the church, because her parents did a lot of business with the church. And the nature of this sort of code book that she got was also sewn. So it would be a visual practice kind of thing, and we do see evidence of samplers. That's a lot of what I was looking at when I was looking at the history, and that's something that Claire Hunter talks about a lot in her book. Ladies, help me out here. What would you say? Yes. Yeah, grandma and mom. Yeah, so it would be, it's transmission. Would you say any, yep? Okay, this is the expert group right here in the front here. But yeah, I have seen examples of very young people having just done extraordinary embroidery. Again, I would remind that, you know, a 14-year-old was considered competent and adult in that kind of way at that time.
We are out of time now, but please please join me in thanking Barbara again.
Thank you all so much for coming. Bye, everybody.